Cool. And yeah, it looks like we're good. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of Codecademy Live. We've got an exciting one for you today. We're here with Josh Goldberg, who is going to be teaching us a little bit about TypeScript. Hi, Josh. How are you?
Doing great. I'm excited for my first live stream. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, Josh, so a little bit of background. I know absolutely nothing about TypeScript, so I'm excited to learn some. You are probably the person that is most excited about TypeScript that I know in my life. Can you give us a little bit of background about how you got into TypeScript, kind of what you do at Codecademy, all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. TypeScript is great. Big fan of it. It's a superset of JavaScript, meaning it adds a bunch of really useful stuff on top of regular JavaScript. So as a web developer, you don't have to use TypeScript, but if you choose to, it can be really useful. I got into it because I had a few personal projects a bunch of years ago that were very bad code, I will say politely to myself. They were very sloppy. It was very hard to keep track of what was going on. And I kind of fell in love with TypeScript and other things that are called static analysis, stuff that looks at your code without running it and tells you where it's good or bad, because they helped me a lot in cleaning up the old code and figuring out how everything works. So now, fast forward a few years, I work at Codecademy on our front end team, and we use TypeScript in pretty much everything that users touch. So I'm really excited to be able to show off how this thing works.
Yeah, it'll be if you can kind of show us how TypeScript is used in Codecademy, that would be a cool little bonus as well. I think the plan is going through a little bit of our TypeScript course, which I think you wrote, or at least you advised on or helped write a couple of years ago. Yeah, what was that like? I guess of trying to teach TypeScript to Codecademy users.
Ooh, it was fun. When I joined Codecademy, it was early 2019. You were there. We didn't really use TypeScript that much. I know there were a few people in the company who were interested, but no one had gotten around to really putting in the investigation effort and switching things over. Similarly, we didn't have any TypeScript in our curriculum, which is a little bit of a hole because it's very popular and important for a lot of web dev areas. I think it was very formative and learning for me because there is a lot of thought that goes into Codecademy curriculum. A lot of people, I think, miss that there is a lot of, I believe the term y'all in curriculum uses pedagogy. There's a lot of kind of understanding of what needs to go in what order. How do you explain things to someone without either making them feel stupid or making them feel like you're just telling them things they already know? So teaching TypeScript was a battle of trying to figure out what are the core parts of TypeScript that are really important, and how do you explain those well to people who might not have any experience in a typed language like C# or Java or C++ beforehand. Does that make sense and answer the question you were looking for?
Yeah, I think so. Cool. Yeah. Do you want to jump in and take a look at some TypeScript?
Yeah, I thought for the stream today, I'd share my browser screen and we'd go through the Learn TypeScript course. I am very proud of and excited about this course because I didn't fully write it, but I did help advise on it and write some of the content, although I think it's changed a bit since I started it. So I reset my progress here. And oh yeah, this graphic, this is new. And I just met my weekly target. Love these little delighter features. But yeah, going through it, TypeScript lets us type variables with different, hang on a second. Is this the first thing? Oh no, it jumps. That might be a bug on our end. We have to fix that. There we go. What is TypeScript? That's what we're supposed to start on. I remember being so pleased with the art person on this graphic. This graphic is just so beautiful. I've used it in presentations.
Oh my God, nice.
But yeah, invented in 95, JavaScript was designed as a small scripting language. It wasn't until 99 that it could do all sorts of dynamic web pages, which weren't really common until 2005, which is true. I remember when learning HTML for the first time, it was all tables, and there was like very little interactivity. And now we have things like Twitter and Instagram. So in 2012, Microsoft developed TypeScript and released it publicly to blend kind of the flexibility of JavaScript with the advantages of a stricter language. JavaScript doesn't have types, which is a feature in other languages that allow the developers to say explicitly what something is supposed to be. Like this variable is supposed to be a string, or that function is supposed to take in 2 numbers and an array of Booleans or something. And JavaScript doesn't let you do that. There's just no concept in the language. So at its core, what TypeScript is it adds a type system to JavaScript. It says you can now declare in your code what stuff is allowed to be or not allowed to be. Does that explanation ring with you?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Why would somebody care about that? And so I think, so if you're watching this and you're not familiar with TypeScript or JavaScript, really, I think that this comes up with like Python, where Python, you don't have to declare, hey, this variable is going to be an integer, or this variable is going to be a string. It can just kind of be whatever it wants, versus something like Java, you have to specifically say, this thing that I just created is a string and it's only ever going to be a string. And so I think people have different opinions on that, where it's certainly nice to write Python. You don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. You can kind of like write code quickly, and it's probably it's a little bit easier to work with than something like Java. So why add this level of complexity of adding types to JavaScript?
That's a great question. I think that you're absolutely right. You hit it on the nail on the head. When you're starting out and you just want to get something to work, you're in like early mode, hackathon, just trying to get the thing to work. It's really annoying to have to jump through hoops to get the whatever tooling, the compiler happy. But if you have 100 files in JavaScript and a function declared in one file that's used in a dozen other files, it gets really confusing and annoying to try to figure out what is that function supposed to take in. The example that I like to give is, suppose it's supposed to take in an object that has a name, a superpower, and a weakness. You're in the Marvel universe or something. And then later on in your code, you realize, well, actually, I'd like to have weakness be an array because some people are weak to multiple things. Now, in JavaScript, it would be incredibly difficult to figure out all the places that call that function, all the places that call those places, and switch from anything that could be a string to an array of strings and make sure you've gotten all of them. Whereas in TypeScript, because you've defined in your code, this must be an array or this must be a string, it'll tell you if you've forgotten a place, saying, hey, you passed a string here, did you need to pass a string array? So definitely very useful, not just for explicitly saying what's supposed to be in the code, but as you change things, which almost always happens in code that lives for a while, it makes it easier to know when you've messed up or when you still need to change more stuff.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing when you're learning programming, because oftentimes the programs that you're working on are a single file or maybe 3 or 4 files that are all working together. And so I think it's hard to like replicate this giant system where a change in this variable is going to have like impact beyond what you can possibly like track down if you don't have systems like this. So it's kind of an interesting thing that's a little bit hard to teach, because a lot of introductory coding lessons are kind of sandboxy and self-contained. So it's a cool experiment in like trying to teach something that is impactful for the really big projects.
Yeah, for sure. I remember actually that was one of the difficulties in making this course, that we didn't want to show people these 50 file projects. We needed to show the usefulness in just one file. Yeah. Oh, cool. Should I move on?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Let's see some code.
I guess I will also say that right now we are live, and I see people chatting in the YouTube chat. If you have any questions for Josh, again, I could not imagine more of a TypeScript expert, and so please feel free to put any questions you have in the YouTube chat.
Would love questions. It is, as someone who's doing this for the first time, I'll tell you, it is terrifying to me that I am boring people. So please sound up, give me your questions. But yeah, let's look at some TypeScript. The first thing that I'm very excited that we teach about TypeScript, someone using O3 yeah, is that a lot of JavaScript code is also completely, totally valid TypeScript code and vice versa. This example here, let first name is Anders equals Anders. Fun fact, Anders Hellsberg, the architect leader of TypeScript, was also the leader of C#, another Microsoft open source language. It would output this code, let first name equals Anders. So if you were to run this in TypeScript and then have TypeScript output JavaScript, which is what TypeScript does, they'd look the same because TypeScript is a superset. It's JavaScript plus other stuff. And if you don't use the other stuff, it's still just JavaScript. So the way you might use TypeScript. Oh, no, sorry, go ahead.
Josh, I guess kind of a question about that. I think So when I think of like supersets or like add-ons to a language, I think of like packages in Python of like, oh, I'm using base Python, but I want to do some graphing. And so I import matplotlib as a package. What makes TypeScript its own language as opposed to like, you know, a package or an add-on or something like that to JavaScript? Or is that definition just like, is there a distinction between those two? Like, is TypeScript just a JavaScript package?
Oh, that's such an interesting question because there are multiple answers to that. TypeScript is technically written in TypeScript, which is fun. And it's distributed as an NPM package. So the standard package manager for JavaScript, akin to, I forget what the Python one is called, but the one you, I think, are referencing. It is, so TypeScript is, it's a language and it's a type checker and a compiler all in one thing. So there's a specification saying you're allowed to do this console.log or this let in code, like this is valid TypeScript syntax. And then there's also a package that is called the same thing, TypeScript or the TypeScript compiler, that takes in the TypeScript code and outputs JavaScript code. And the way that that package understands how to work with your code is it checks your code against the TypeScript language spec. It says, okay, this let is allowed, this is fine. So it'll output the equivalent JavaScript. So when we say TypeScript is a superset, what we really mean is that the language idea of TypeScript contains all the JavaScript syntax plus some more stuff. And then the TypeScript package takes in TypeScript syntax, it outputs JavaScript syntax.
Got it.
Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a hard question to answer of like, what is a programming language either, which is like hard to specifically define in a way that makes sense. But yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. I remember talking to someone once who said that people should always learn assembly, the like lowest level bits, ones and zeros, and then work their way up. And I think that would be a very difficult thing. So now we deal with fractions. Yeah. Let's look if we in the bash terminal provided here, we've pre-installed a TypeScript package. So if you run TSC, which stands for TypeScript compiler, it will create an equivalent file, index.js. Cool. Interesting how the syntax highlighting is different. There's a bug somewhere. But yeah, index.ts became index.js, and similar to this let example, they're the same thing. And if we run node index.js, we get the nice hello world. Yay.
Cool. And just to be clear, so like if we try doing node index.ts, that is not going to work because node presumably doesn't know how to interpret TypeScript.
What? Confusingly, it does work. I'm going to sneak peek. If you add TypeScript specific syntax, this colon space string is something new. And then you try to node index. Yeah, oops, I hit save. You're a fool.
You probably need to hit run to save. Yeah.
That's what I was trying to do. Thank you.
Yeah. Nice. So once we start adding TypeScript specific things to our TypeScript file, then Node can no longer run it.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is one of the difficulties with TypeScript, that you have to compile from your TS file to your JS file using a tool such as TSC, the TypeScript compiler, the official one.
Cool.
Moving on. But before we get into those type annotations, let's look at type inferences. So TypeScript looks at your code and understands things from it based off of all the stuff that it sees being done. In this case, it can look at your aged variable and see that it's of type Boolean because it was initially true. Or it can look at real age and see its number because it's set to 0 by default. This fun fact, these little popover things, this was kind of hard to add to the learning environment. We added it specifically to support the TypeScript course to start. A fun feature to add. Someone asked in the chat, if I'm working with my React, do I need to use TypeScript, not JS? No, you can always use JavaScript with any package that's popular, like React or Angular. Some of the packages really emphasize and recommend TypeScript, such as Angular, but you can still use regular JavaScript. Yeah. One of the cool things about TypeScript, though, is that it adds a lot of cool stuff, such as helpful inferences. In this case, we are trying to assign a string value, 4 years, to real age. But the way TypeScript understands variables is that if it has an initial value and it's inferred to be that initial value's type, it should only ever be that type of value. So we're not allowed to say assign a string to something originally type number, because TypeScript thinks, well, that was originally a number. You're not allowed to put a string there. Does that make sense, Alex? I don't know if that's a reasonable explanation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. What happens if you don't give it an initial value? Does it just kind of stay typeless until you do give it initial value?
Yes, it's what's called an evolving any. When something doesn't have an initial value, when TypeScript can't figure out what it is, that defaults to the any type. Ooh, this is an interesting. This is cool. So TypeScript can later figure out, and in fact, TypeScript will tell editors that, hey, I can figure out from its usage what the type is actually supposed to be. I can infer type of thing from usage. In this case, this is the operator indicating it's either a string or a number.
Got it.
The any type is kind of a bad smell. Like normally we try to avoid it. It's called an evolving. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, it seems like it's kind of defeating the purpose of, if the special thing about TypeScript is giving variables types, then giving everything the any type is like, we're kind of just back to JavaScript.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes it's just annoying to try to type things out properly. But for all the examples we're going to look at today, there's generally a good type to put in. It's evolving because TypeScript can figure out that after you assign something to it, it actually is that thing's type.
Got it.
So after on line 5, we assign a string to real age. TypeScript knows it's type string. Oh, that's not supported in our editor. That's funny. But yeah, don't do any. Here we go. So if we do run to save and then TSC index TS, there we go. We see that type string is not assignable to type number is an actual error given to us by TypeScript. Fun fact for our learners, you can resize this window. And it looks like real age, the assigned value real age should be 4, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. And if we run TSC index TS, no complaints. Yay.
Cool.
But to really dive in here, the way TypeScript understands a shape is pretty key to how TypeScript works overall. If we see that first name is Muriel and it's a string, TypeScript then knows that first name has all the things a string has, like dot length, or first name dot. Oh, I'm not getting suggestions here. We might have turned that feature off. But like first name dot split or something is a method. But if you do first name dot to uppercase, TypeScript knows that's wrong. Did you mean to uppercase with a capital C?
Got it.
So that's like, I think immediately like the first example of real value that TypeScript gives someone, where if you mistype something, it can suggest the correct thing to use there.
So back in JavaScript world, is the difference just that, you know, our text editor wouldn't recommend dot length because it doesn't know that it's a string? Or if I tried to dot length a JavaScript variable, would that just only work if it is a string?
Yeah. A lot of JavaScript editors now, somewhat confusingly, use TypeScript to understand their autocompletion. For example, VS Code very aggressively does that. So it might tell you you can't use dot whatever the wrong thing is, the typo. But yeah, most of the time, if I were writing this code in just JavaScript and I console logs with the wrong thing, node index TS, it would give it a crash. You would just know at runtime, oh, I messed something up, better go find it, which is really annoying because you have to wait until it runs. And sometimes it takes a long time to use your program or project or whatever until you get to the point where it crashes. So it's quite nice to have it in your editor with the little red or yellow squiggly here.
Nice.
Cool. Fun fact, by the way, these are all references to 90s cartoons in this lesson. Muriel is from Courage the Cowardly Dog, one of my favorite.
We have a question in chat, which is maybe a tough question to answer, but if I'm trying to build an API, is TypeScript better than JavaScript?
Better is a hard question to answer. Yeah. You don't have to use, oh, there's some people in the chat right now. Hi, John. You don't have to use TypeScript. I'd say if you're not familiar with TypeScript, it can be quite confusing to suddenly use it for an API or some project. So I definitely recommend if you do want to use TypeScript and you don't know it yet, bucket some time to really learn it to make it easier for yourself. But there are a lot of advantages for TypeScript. When you write something in TypeScript, you can output shapes, definitions for these shapes that we're seeing here. So consumers of your API understand better what it's supposed to be, what types. I just think it's a really good language for writing stuff because it gives me a lot of development utilities. So I can't really answer the question, is it better to use JavaScript or TypeScript? But I can say that if you know TypeScript or are willing to learn and have the time, it is very useful and I would recommend it.
Cool.
Let's see. What was the need of TypeScript when we already have strongly typed languages on the back end? Oh, such a good question. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So you'd use TypeScript wherever JavaScript is used. And JavaScript is used in Node.js. And more recently also in Deno, which is similar to Node, but from the same original creator and much more secure. So although you could be writing strongly typed stuff on the back end, say, I don't know, Go or C++ or Java, there's still a lot of advantage to writing things in the same language on your server and client. Let's say that you have a project, a small app that has a backend server, a front-end app, and then some shared types that are supposed to be understood. Maybe you have a cat API, and the shape of a cat is supposed to be sent from the client to the server, or vice versa. It's really useful to be able to use the same language and then share type definitions or class definitions between the front end and the back end. So even though people might have preferred to write in some other language like C# on the back end, there's still a lot of advantage to writing in the same language. So if you're writing on the front end, which is practically always JavaScript these days for web apps, you might as well write in JavaScript or TypeScript for the backends too. So yeah, a lot of frameworks like Next.js and Gatsby are popping up because it's really nice to be able to use the same language for your server and client. Alex, I don't know if that chimes well with some of the thoughts you have there.
No, I think it makes a little bit of sense to me. Again, I'm not a web developer, so like even the distinction between, I don't quite know I've never encountered an exact example of like, oh, this is where I wish my front end and back end language were the exact same. That's never come up just because I'm not a web developer, but I definitely get your point of or seeing how that might be useful.
Cool. Yeah. The world of web development is wild and wacky at times. Random considerations like using the same language mean much more when using a different language would mean having to cross language boundaries for types or not being able to use the same process to serve a rendered web page. Yeah, I'm gonna fix these errors. Node index, yes. So the issue was, I'm actually going to use TypeScript's quick fix to change spelling on this one because I love using the TypeScript things.
Nice.
Run that.
Yeah, really cool that we got that in our text editor here.
I know. We actually completely overhauled the text editor at around the same time as this course. Mm-hmm. It used to be something called CodeMirror, and then we switched it to something called Monaco to be more accessible. So like folks who don't have a mouse or are low vision can use it. And coincidentally, Monaco is what is used in VS Code, which has great TypeScript support because it's also written by Microsoft. Yeah, you asked earlier about any's, and this you were peeking ahead, I think, instinctively. What happens if we have guess without an initial value? Well, it's an any, which is not great. So it's allowed to be anything. And then the end result is TypeScript doesn't stop you from putting in any particular value on it.
Got it. And so I would have actually expected that to error because again, I would have expected this to be, what is it called, an evolving any where I would have guessed setting it equal to blue would have said, okay, this is a string. And then once I set it to 1, then it would error. So I guess this surprised me of not crashing there.
Yeah, To be honest, evolving any's happen so rarely that I just don't
Yeah,
I don't know much about them. I only learned the term after we wrote this course, which is why I don't think the course actually references the evolving any concept. But yeah, I believe it's that it starts off as any, and then from there on out is always any. And TypeScript might be able to give you better suggestions based off of it if it sees
Got
you
it.
trying to type, but it's still any.
Got it. Makes sense.
So what some folks might be thinking at that point is, well, does this mean TypeScript doesn't let you declare a variable without an initial value? But no, you can add type in it. Oh, that's a typo. There should be no space in front of that. No. Formatting preferences. So like this phone number thing is a good example where we meant for it to be a string. So you can explicitly say colon space string or colon space whatever the type is supposed to be.
Got it. And so that if we didn't include that, it would be an any, but now that we are including that, we're saying, hey, this thing doesn't have value yet, but it will eventually be a string.
Yes, exactly. If we want TSC.
What is the concept of like null or undefined or any of that stuff? Does TypeScript handle that in the same way that JavaScript does?
It does, yeah. Null and undefined are both types and values. So you can say that, for example, let my value colon null, and then my value is only allowed to be null.
Got it.
Which seems useless at first. But.
I guess maybe this is me not knowing JavaScript. What is phone number on line 2? Before we give phone number a value, is it undefined? Is it null? Is it?
It is undefined.
Got it.
And TypeScript will actually tell you if you use it before you've assigned a value, it's undefined. That's not going to work. Variable whatever is being used before assigned.
Okay, cool. And so I guess that's. I mean, I guess that just makes sense. So phone number is going to be a string, but it's allowed to be undefined until it is a string.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Are you familiar with the term $1 billion mistake, any chance?
No, I'm not.
Oh, it's one of my favorite things. I think we go over it later in the lesson, but the idea in a lot of programming languages is that you can assign the null value in that language, null, undefined, nil, whatever they call it, to anywhere that it expects some other value type. So like in some languages, you'd be allowed to do this. And TypeScript originally had that $1 billion mistake of allowing this, and then later on added a feature so you can make it so this is not allowed. It was originally there because some languages didn't have an understanding of the difference. It was easy to add in. But the person who made it later called it his $1 billion mistake because this is really annoying and it has caused a lot of bugs, perhaps over $1 billion of bugs at this point.
Nice. Interesting question from chat. We were kind of talking about this before, but doesn't any type ruin the whole purpose of strongly typed? I don't think any is of any use because again, it's kind of ruining the purpose of TypeScript.
Yeah, it does defeat the purpose of TypeScript, but it only defeats the purpose of TypeScript in one small little place. So I would rather have a file that's 90% TypeScript and has a few any's in there in places that I couldn't type than have a file that's 0% TypeScript and is only JavaScript.
Nice, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Question about difference between let and var. That's definitely a JavaScript thing, but does TypeScript do anything specific with let versus var?
No, TypeScript recognizes how JavaScript plays differently with them. Let in JavaScript and const in JavaScript are newer than var, where var has some weird behavior, where like if you do this var hello inside an if statement, the hello variable will be available after the if statement, which is weird. What's saying this? Yeah, because this code is very confusing to me. Vars get automatically hoisted declaration or file. So like even though the var, oh no, that was weird. Even though the var is declared inside the if and the else, it gets hoisted up here. So it's as if we did var hello here. So that's weird and confusing, and no one likes that. And that's how JavaScript's been forever. Let and const don't do that, which is why we all prefer them now.
So if you switch that var to a let on line 8, then line 15 will start to yell at us. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a JavaScript thing. TypeScript recognizes a lot of JavaScript features such as let and var and const, but does not. I love John Riley is another TypeScript person who's done a lot of open source work. You mentioned, yes, it is Tony. I don't know how to say his last name in the chat, who invented null. So yeah, cool. We can now, by the way, see that phone number is supposed to be a string, so I can fix that.
Thanks.
Cool. Moving on. All right. Line of code made me so happy. Fun fact, I had to fight to get these emojis here. There were some emojis, so we had to fix some bugs.
Can only imagine what the emoji code course had to go through.
Oh, it was hell. Worth it though. But yeah, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that adds types. It's a language, and it's also a compiler that takes in TypeScript code and outputs JavaScript code. TypeScript has a type system which can look at your code and understand these variables are particular types. And once it understands a variable's type, it can understand the shape of that variable. Let's say it's a string, so it has a dot length on it. If you can't infer a type, you can use a type annotation, such as :boolean. Otherwise, TypeScript will think it's an any type, which somewhat defeats the purpose of TypeScript locally a little bit.
Shape is an interesting term that I feel like I haven't heard in any other programming language. I feel like if I were to make an equivalent to Java or Python or something like that, I would be using class of like, okay, you know, I have this object, it's of class dog, it can do anything that a dog can do. Is that kind of the same way to think about shape? Like, how does shape differ from class?
This is, I love this. These are such good questions. TypeScript is such a weird, unique language compared to most other mainstream programming languages in that it's structurally typed or shape typed, meaning it cares about the shape of objects less than it does the exact reason why they are that shape. We'll see this a little bit more where we start defining object shapes, but if you define a shape, let's say you define an interface, and this is a little bit peeking ahead, like has length, where it defines that something passed in must have a length, takes has length, and then takes has length is provided, let's say array, and provided a string. TypeScript is structurally typed and only cares about the shapes, meaning both of these are okay. You don't have to explicitly say that I'm passing in an array or passing in a string. As long as the thing passed in happens to satisfy the shape being requested, it's allowed. So that's why we use the term
meaning both strings and arrays have a length. And so because you've said, hey, this thing has to have a length, both of those will work.
Yes, exactly. And even if you pass in some arbitrary object that just so happens to have a length number, all we care about is that has the length. That's fine.
Makes sense. And that's different than a class because, you know, a class is only this specific thing, but TypeScript just says if you're in the shape of what we are asking for, then it will work.
Exactly. Yeah. Although there are some peculiarities with how TypeScript deals with classes. Let's say that we do say this explicitly must be the hasLength class, and then we do takes hasLength class and pass in an array. That's fine. TypeScript actually doesn't explicitly need you to pass in an instance of the class as long as it satisfies the correct shape, which is very weird and a lot of people are confused about when they first see it. So like this thing won't satisfy, is not assignable to parameter of type. And honestly, I can never remember the reason why this is the case, but it has to do with structural typing being just like a convenient thing. So fun.
Nice.
Yeah, we're peeking ahead. Do we have time to move on to the next?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have you for until noon if you can stay that long.
I'm down. I will note though that I am deploying code to production in the background, and every time you ask a question, I'm furiously checking to make sure I didn't connect page of deployment because we had a slowdown earlier today. That's always what happens. So I might get pulled.
That's all
Yeah,
right. Maybe and this might be putting you on the spot. Could you show an example of how TypeScript or where TypeScript is used on Codecademy itself?
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at source code. Fun fact, on Codecademy, we intentionally keep all of our source maps in production, which means you can, in your dev tools, look at our code. Source maps is the thing that tells some environments, such as a browser, this JavaScript source actually looks like some other file. And we also enable the React dev tools on production. So if you're a React aficionado like me, and you want to see how things work, you can use the dev tools to look at all of our stuff. So like this article content container is a component that we've declared. And I actually don't know how to skip from these dev tools to the source. If that's a doable thing. Does that work? Well, that almost worked. But article content there we go. I guess I'll just look at some other component. Oh yeah, some of these components are kind of wacky. But yeah, here we go. The way that we define an article, which is the current container that we're seeing on the screen, is we say it's of type React.fc, so React function component. And using the syntax that I think eventually gets introduced called the generic, we say that the type of props for this article are article props. I'm realizing as I say this is all kind of React specific stuff. But I will say though that it's kind of hard to find examples of where TypeScript's really used, because most of the time TypeScript code looks a lot like JavaScript code. Like this all is basically JavaScript code.
Well, and then even declaring that, I mean, I think scrolling up a little bit, declaring that variable, like that's that same syntax of colon space and then the type, and the type just happens to be this React thing, right?
Yeah. Ooh, actually, url.ts. Here we go. We have URL helpers. We have a file that has all the URLs on Codecademy. So if you ever wonder what all the URLs are you could possibly hit in your learning experience, urlhelpers.ts has them. And yeah, these look a lot more like JavaScript, where some of these parameters we've declared as type colon string. Yeah. Oh yeah, fun fact, that's going to be a feature. I should scroll past that.
Some previews.
Exciting.
Cool. Yeah. So I think, I mean, my question is like, I kind of get it, right? Okay, TypeScript is JavaScript with types. Like, I guess I'm curious what comes next in the course. Like, there's obviously going to be a lot more subtleties to that. But like, when you're introducing TypeScript to someone, I imagine you go through these basics of, it's like JavaScript, but we can assign types to variables. What do you teach next?
Great question. I'm going to use this opportunity to shout out the learner experience team at Codecademy for building this new course menu, which helps me answer that question. First, we talk about types, which has a lesson, some articles about the TS configuration file, which is the standard file that folks can write to configure TypeScript's settings. We have them do a couple small projects with it. Once you understand types, we then move you on to functions, being able to declare function parameters and optional parameters and types. Once you go through functions, we bring you on to my favorite one, complex types, which actually is a weird name. Maybe we should rename that to, no, that makes sense, because we talk about arrays and objects. So being able to type what's in an array, or if you have an object literal in JavaScript, what are all of its members supposed to be? And then, oh yeah, unions and narrowing are one of the coolest things. Another feature that's not super popular in a lot of mainstream languages, but TypeScript has made popular, is union types, where you say that something can be one thing or another. For example, a parameter might be a string or undefined, which is where the undefined and null types start being really useful. And then lastly there, with type narrowing and advanced object types, if you do an if statement that checks whether something is, say, defined, TypeScript will understand within the if statement that that thing is defined. So it can narrow down from a union type, which says something is, say, number or undefined, to just number, or if it's not defined, just undefined. And then after that, we do fancy advanced object types, like, I forget what those are, but I would assume nested interfaces and stuff like that.
Cool.
Yeah, I think the general gist is because TypeScript just adds to JavaScript, it doesn't make its own opinions and architecture or structure. Most of the learning for TypeScript is about how to use the type system to declare your existing JavaScript stuff.
Question about union types, I guess. To me, that again seems like a little bit similar to any, where in theory you could union every type together and get any. Is that kind of the same idea of like, oh, sometimes in our code it could be one of two things, and so it's like kind of bending the rules of TypeScript a little bit of like, oh, we want things to be strongly typed, we want this to only be a integer or a string or whatever, but in reality sometimes it's going to have to be one of two things. Is that a fair way of thinking about that?
It actually is the correct way of, it's not just a, do I remember right? Do you have a math background of any sort?
Slight. I mean, like, I took calculus 2 in college and stuff, but nothing super intense.
Well, TypeScript actually has a lot of type theory and set theory in the roots of its type system. And what you just said, that the any type is a union of all possible types, is actually the correct theoretical way of thinking about the any type. So there was a great talk at the last TSConf from Dan Vanderkam, author of one of the good TypeScript books, Effective TypeScript, about how you can take this, one of the analogies was you can take a big piece of marble, that's the any type, and you can chisel away smaller types from it. So maybe one part of it is string, and then you can chisel away from string all the possible string literals, which actually is the difference between a primitive and a literal. The primitive type might be string, but the literal type might be empty string or hello or something like that. And within the set of all possible types, you have these subsets of each other. And any is the possible union type of anything that could possibly be anything.
And then, like, in theory, like the string type is the union of all of these smaller string types.
Exactly.
Cool.
Oh, I'm so excited. It's such a good way of thinking about it.
Nice. Well, what do you want to do next? Do you want to show any of this stuff off? Do you want to one thing that I want to ask you before we leave is about the TypeScript like community in general. I follow you on Twitter and see you tweeting about conferences and TypeScript and all that kind of stuff all the time. So I kind of wanted to pick your brain about that community and how to get more involved. But if you wanted to show something off, or show off anything else, I think we can also do that.
Sure, yeah. I'll skip off of Codecademy, go off platform for the TypeScript playgrounds, and then I'll answer the community question. Cool. This, I think, is the single most useful tool I have found for explaining TypeScript things to people. It works similarly to the Codecademy courses, and we're actually going to have a feature soon. It's in beta now called Workspaces that somewhat work like this, where you have a playground to work in. But just showing off the unions thing, like if you have a const, I'm gonna get this one out of it. My name equals math.random Josh or Alex. Actually, let's make it Josh undefined. Sorry, Alex. And then if my name exists, we look at my name here. TypeScript understands that my name is no longer Josh or undefined. It's specifically Josh.
Got it. Because you wouldn't get into that if statement otherwise.
Exactly. So here we have the concept of a type union using a type literal, not just the primitive string, but literally Josh or undefined. And then we have my name here. And then in the else statements, my name is undefined. Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, this playground is great. It has a whole bunch of plugins. Orta, former member of just the TypeScript community and now also a member of the TypeScript team, set it up very nicely. So there's like a presentation mode and all sorts of cool stuff. The TypeScript website itself, which has a link to the playground, is very good, has a lot of really great documentation and resources. So if you want like the pure docs and not a guided walkthrough the way Codecademy is, typescriptlang.org. The community sites, they're super active on Twitter and GitHub. Fun fact, if you go to github.com, Microsoft TypeScript issues, there are last I checked, there are 4,900. Now it's rounding up to 5,000 issues on TypeScript. So I would recommend if you have a problem with the language, figure it out or try to figure it out on Stack Overflow first. And then if you actually think you found a bug or identified a feature that you want to add to the language, they're totally open to these things, provided you do your due diligence and like see if someone's asked for the same thing before. Very fun place to be. They also
have you worked on this repo? Have you worked on, you know, any of these issues?
Yeah, I actually have 2 open pull requests now. I've merged a few dozen into TypeScript. One is a really cool feature actually, where it like improves how TypeScript narrows things in the falsy case. Let me see. So the TypeScript playground can preview different TypeScript versions or even like nightways. So like in the original TypeScript playground, in the current version of TypeScript, if you do if text on string or undefined, and then an else, here text is inferred to be string or undefined, because it could be the empty string or it could be undefined if it doesn't exist.
Got it.
And then in this feature I'm trying to propose, we change it so that TypeScript understands it's only a falsy string. So it would be
it has to be empty string or undefined.
Cool.
That makes sense.
The benefit of being an open source language.
Huh. This is maybe a very random question, but when I see these kind of I don't even know how to describe it, inferences that the language is making based on using conditionals and based on the type of variable, I guess I think of short circuiting in Java, where, you know, if I have true or whatever, that Java just like won't even look at the or, because it knows that true happen. It knows that the thing is going to be evaluated to true. Is this at all related to any of that? Any of this of like kind of shortcuts that the language can take?
Yeah, I'd say
based on
so.
what it can infer. Yeah,
like shortcuts, short circuiting, and inferences in the type system. Yeah. Fun fact: TypeScript actually, I think, has a checker for this. It'll tell you if there's unreachable code. I don't know how often it's. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah. So that's the control flow analysis checker, I think that's called. But yeah, in the type system, I think it's equivalent. Yeah.
cool.
Oh, and for the community, once you're done playing around on the playground, a lot of people end up needing to integrate with external packages when they're using TypeScript. Like, let's say you are writing a React package, and React itself is not written in TypeScript. So you would use what's called a definition file or a types package to tell your local TypeScript how your external packages, such as React, are meant to look. And the TypeScript playground, which is linked, sorry, not the playground, the TypeScript types search tool, which is at aka.ms/types, my favorite URL in the world, is a great search engine that'll tell you how to get the types. For example, for React, you install the at types React npm package, which will then tell your TypeScript project what React looks like. Nifty.
If I am brand new to this, or maybe I've taken that Codecademy course and want to continue learning TypeScript, like what is the thing that I should do from there?
Great question. The Codecademy projects in the course are pretty good for getting you set up with some TypeScript stuff. There's a difference that a lot of our learners have noted between writing stuff in the Codecademy ecosystem and then moving off platform. So these projects, I think, do a good job of helping you get there. Once you've done them, because JavaScript's a prerequisite for TypeScript, just conceptually the way we have it set up, it's probably reasonable to assume that you might have other JavaScript projects you've already written. So maybe convert those to TypeScript. I think that's a fun thing. And really any project that you've done in JavaScript, I think would be a theoretical good example of something to do in TypeScript. Excuse me. I personally really writing Connect 4 as a game. It was like my first project when I did C++, the first language I learned for more than a year. So like writing a TypeScript thing in C for Connect 4 is, I think, a good idea. It's like a good way of showing basic logic in a more complex project. So that's my recommendation.
Cool.
Every year there's, oh, sorry, one more thing I wanted to note. Every year there's a conference, TS Conf, which actually just happened last week. So recommend checking out TS Conf next year, TS Conf 2022.
Josh, do you want to plug your book?
Oh yeah, I'm not. Well, now that you mention it, yes, I am writing a book, but it's scheduled to be published in either somewhere within July through September of next year. I don't know if I'm allowed to plug it on this stream as it competes with Codecademy, but it is a TypeScript TypeScript book that I'm writing.
Follow Josh on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Joshua K. Goldberg. You can look me up. I have somewhat okay SEO, so look forward to hearing from all y'all about TypeScript.
Yeah, and then anything else you wanna say about TypeScript or show?
No, but thank you for having me. This was fun. I hope our learners got something out of it.
Yeah, thank you everyone for watching. So this was really the first time that we've had a real engineer at Codecademy walking us through stuff. I think I don't have anything scheduled right now, but I'm gonna be reaching out to other engineers to see if they want to do things like this. If you have ideas of things that you want to see, feel free to put those in the comments of this video on YouTube. And then we also have Fede from our community team is doing a lot of live streams like this with our recruiting with our recruiting department and talking about how to get jobs in tech. So not as hands-on with code, but still super valuable if that's what you're interested in. So I think he has another one of those coming up next week. So be on the lookout for that. Josh, thanks so much for doing this. This was great to get an hour of your time.
Thank you. See you next time.